Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast, sponsored by InfoProlearning. As always, I'm your host, Nolan Hout. I'm very excited for today's episode because we're going to take a step back from talking about the nuts and bolts of learning and focus a little bit more on the culture within L&D itself, and specifically how we need to be feeling comfortable about failing early and failing often, and how that can be a superpower within L&D teams. Leading us in this conversation is Patrick Peterson, a manager of human capital and workforce development at Deloitte. Patrick has been in this space for over 15 years now and has a really good mix of that hands-on expertise, but also a lot of L&D strategy and leadership expertise. Like me, he's doing quite a bit, but focusing a lot on AI at Deloitte. But that's a story for possibly another podcast. Speaking of podcasts, let's go ahead and kick things off and meet our guest. Hello, Patrick. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Nolan. Happy to be here. How are you doing today?
Oh, doing wonderful. And
Awesome.
Patrick, thanks so much. I'm excited to get talking to you today about a myriad of issues. And before we even got started, I realized I feel like we're going to have another podcast. I understand that you're leading a lot of the AI over at Deloitte in those conversations, and I am here. So, gosh, I'm sure we have a whole series for that. But today, we're really going to talk about taking risks and why that's so important today in L&D. But before we do that, we always like to start by just learning a little bit more about the guests that we have on the show. And obviously, you've done quite a bit in your career, been at Deloitte for quite some time, but everybody starts somewhere. What was your origin story of getting into learning and development and where you are today at Deloitte?
Uh, it's an interesting story. I've been at Deloitte for almost 14 years now. Before working at Deloitte, I worked for the federal government, and my it was an inspector general office, and the role was to detect fraud, waste, and abuse of U.S. funds in Afghanistan. Uh, as part of that effort, I had a small team that was really focused on going through financial transactions and detecting kind of contract irregularities and things like that. I was empowered relatively early in my career to lead this team, and very soon after my first day, I realized that I knew nothing about leadership and very little about using automated tools to detect fraud, waste, and abuse in Afghanistan. So I needed to learn how to do so very quickly. Uh, I I essentially created a curriculum for myself that then refined. I've then refined with my team that we kind of created our own little curriculum, and in so doing, I really discovered my passion of sort of using learning to drive skills growth and
Mm,
creating a space, a safe space where people can learn, consider what their strengths are, grow, and develop as people. I feel very strongly learning in an organization, that's where the culture lives.
yeah.
And for organizations to meet this moment of unprecedented transformation, we need to preserve that culture and provide a space for workers to develop themselves, to grow, and to change. That's why I like learning. That was sort of my origin story, and that's what I've been really fortunate to do. Both for the federal government and then at Deloitte.
Did you feel that, do you feel and that's actually a common thread that I've seen pull through is almost like I didn't feel that I was enabled to be successful. And so I wanted to be the enabler to make sure that I could create something that had others get there. Were you like can you trace that back to your roots of college and stuff? Or was that like just completely in the back of your mind? Or if you look back, can you say, you know what, I guess maybe I was that kind of kid?
Oh, I absolutely. I was totally, I mean, when I was in college, I mean, certainly when I was in college, one of the sort of future visions that I had for myself was to be a professor. The only reason I did not pursue my PhD was because I did not want the 7 years of training after a graduate degree, and I am not I am a very forgetful person, and so
Yeah.
the idea that I would have to do 7 years of research was not appealing to me. But absolutely, I mean, I've always been a person that has liked to enable and support other people, and have always been really interested in sharing knowledge and kind of sharing other people's stories and making sure that those spaces are really open for people to kind of grow and learn from each other. I mean, that's a thing
Well,
that has really been through my career.
Yeah,
Right.
and I mean, sticking with that, that's how we got connected. I had read an article that you wrote about kind of failing fast and risk taking in L&D, and I just thought, what a topic to talk about today. You know, a lot of
Mm,
the stuff that we see with transformation today is really centered around the technology of it all and what can that do, versus like what is the underlying things that we need to have our teams do that. So, if you don't mind, can you do a brief summary? Like when we're talking about if your article, when you wrote, when you're saying we got to fail fast and we got to take risks, what are we really? What's at the heart of that? Why is that, and why is that valuable?
mm. Well, I mean, some of it is in the data. I mean, you mentioned the technical skills. I mean, look, like digital transformation. I mean, it's not a novel idea. Technology is changing absolutely everything at a speed that really is unprecedented. According to some of Deloitte's research, the half-life of a technical skill is something between 16 and 20 months,
Oh my
meaning that you
gosh.
learn something, you learn how to do
Yep.
something in 16 months, that skill's out of date. And you know that for some career fields, that's even shorter than that.
Hmm.
In that environment, in order for L&D to be the hub of culture, to be the place where people go, to be the enabler of the workforce, um, I mean, we just got to produce a lot faster,
Yeah.
and the only way to do that is to do it quickly. I mean, in the field of software development and digital product development, there's the idea of sort of fail fast, learn quickly, and dream big. And L&D doesn't always have that model. And so, what the benefit of failing quickly is you can learn, you can grow, and you use that to improve. The side benefit is you also engage your workforce more frequently in learning. If you
Mm.
have a new product that comes out every couple weeks, if you have a new learning solution that you're deploying to the workforce on a quick basis, if you're doing that kind of engagement rapidly, then it means that you're reaching out in ways that a traditional schoolhouse, a traditional learning and development organization doesn't necessarily do, which only helps you even if the solution itself is maybe not as calibrated, not as great as you want.
Yeah, so I kind of heard a couple elements in there. Maybe we can start at the end of like
Hmm.
it not being perfect,
Mm. Yeah.
and how do you? I feel like, I think that corporate training is a near impossible job to get perfect
Hmm.
because you're having to develop things, even if you try to implement smaller nuggets, like you're still having to cater to a large demographic. It's
Yeah.
not like you're marketing razors to college kids, right? Like Dollar Shave
Yeah.
Club kind of thing. You don't get a timid demographic of, oh, I only have to create something that appeals to a 20-year-old male in college, or whatever it is. It's a much broader spectrum. How do you, when you've got such like and there's many other challenges as well, right? Usually whatever you push out immediately hits a large portion of your workforce,
Hmm.
um, who are your clients. How do you, I guess, merge like this? Let us just get something out, even if it may not be perfect, and then gather results. How do you know when enough is enough?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think there's a few things you can do. One is I do actually think you can do more segmenting of
Yeah.
the workforce, and it's not just jobs. Put the accountants in one group, put the program managers in another group, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. That's a part of it. I think you can take a cut that looks at tenure, that looks at geography, that looks at all kinds of performance ratings and things like that. And I think L&D can generally do a better job of segmenting and programming
Hmm.
for their specific workforces. But then beyond that, it's really about adopting this mindset of what does a minimum viable product look like? So let's
Hmm.
say that you're creating a web-based training on, let's say it's about how to use the, corporate credit card, to comply with policies.
Right.
Every instructional
Really fun.
designer has seen this product, right? Um, you know, a MVP of a solution like that could just be a series of index cards on which you've drawn out what the solution is. You can
Yeah.
put that in front of one or two people and say, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing it this way. What do you think?" That gives you some good understanding. And as you accumulate that, you start to build lessons, right? You know, for instance, that if you put something like that in front of somebody and there's 4 or 5 screens of content, and you hear from a couple people like, "Hey, that's a little too much content." Well, take that
Mm.
lesson down, and then the next time you create something, maybe don't do that. So you can build that kind of knowledge base to get, yeah, you can build that knowledge base to really, improve your product as you go on. But then, I mean, that's where you really do the formative, the testing afterwards. After you have something that you can really pilot and deliver. And I would encourage people to do that earlier rather than at the end. But as you kind of get a 50% solution, that really is when like you get some feedback on this works, this
Yeah.
doesn't, that kind of thing.
And you must face that, so we're in the development space as well. And
Hmm.
when we work with clients, I know this is a struggle that we have, and I think everybody struggles with. Well, you want to show something that looks nice enough that people can
Yeah.
get a flow so they're not like embarrassed. So it is really finding that. But I liked what you said about a couple things, and I think a lot of those are connected, but like one, finding a segment that you feel you can test.
Yeah. Hmm.
Even if it's supposed to be a global thing, right? Or maybe just hits about a customer service team. Just say, hey, can I get five people's email ID? Like it's not going to be a
Hmm.
big, we've got 10,000, you got 1,000 call center agents. What's
Oh, yeah.
five going to do if I take them through a program? And let me just show them, talk to them on the phone. Hey, I was thinking about a training program. It was going to be about 20 minutes long. It's going to cover this topic. Is that what you're looking for? There's a lot. I think we kind of get caught up in, I've got to really formalize this batch as if it's like
Yeah.
a 2.5 minute episode that's going to have screeners and all these things, and we're going to make
Yeah.
a bunch of cuts. A lot of it can be one-to-one, just a conversation, even talking to somebody who's not going to take the training program, but somebody within your peer network of what
Hmm.
does this look like? How does this look? A lot of those things in there I think are really relevant. One of the things though I want to touch on, you mentioned, testing kind of at the beginning. How important is it to know what you're testing for? Like,
Mm.
because I always feel like when I see something go wrong, drastically wrong early on, it's because I don't feel we truly grasp the why behind the why. How important is that before you get off to the races and you start showing people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts that really starts from at the beginning,
Hmm.
and the beginning of the instructional design process. I think there has really been a movement in modern instructional design around focusing on the skills and
Yeah.
really kind of building a training program of any kind that focuses on chaining skills together. So I'm going to teach you
Hmm.
how to do this. I'm going to teach you how to do this. I'm going to teach you how to do that. You really kind of like develop that, like you go from thing to thing. When you do that, you naturally get smaller chunks of
Yeah.
content. And so that also helps you figure out what you're going to test.
Hmm.
So, let's go back to our purchase card example. If one of the skills you need to train people is how to fill out an expense report as quickly as possible, that's a skill, how to use this expense report system. That's a thing you can test. You can see, like, hey, does this give you the ability to use this process? Yes or no? On a scale of 1 to 5, where do you feel like you're hitting on this capability? And that's the type of information that gives you the knowledge of this is working, this is not working.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, go ahead.
and if I could just go, maybe to come back to one of the things you mentioned around what is, I do think instructional designers have a well, everybody, right? Everybody wants to present a polished product. And sometimes the way that you present things can help
Yeah.
it can help kind of like lower the stress.
Yeah.
So, rather than doing a completed PowerPoint deck where all of the fonts and the colors are perfect, doing that as a pilot, like a hand-drawn image or using sort of
Hmm.
the wireframe models where it's intentionally lower fidelity, it is intentionally high level, that often gets you better feedback and you can get it out quickly, because you don't have to spend the time figuring out what font, what color, all of that kind of stuff. You can really kind of focus on the thing you need to focus.
Yeah.
Um,
Like
you
the
know,
difference between opening up a PowerPoint slide in slideshow mode and say, I'm going to take you through this versus keeping it in, edit mode, build mode, and just be like, hey, I'm going to take you through. So, like psychologically, I've already framed myself for okay, we're kind of going a little bit untraditional here. They're going to be changing some words. They're going to be so yeah. You're right. There's so much to how you present it,
Hmm.
and being honest with whatever it is that you're presenting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes, some one of the things that you mentioned earlier on as well. We talked about some tips and things, but there's also I feel like a psychological element, right, to like being able to fail fast. What
Yeah.
talk a little bit about those?
It requires, I think, a sense of vulnerability. You
Hmm.
have to be willing to do something without the certainty of knowing that it's the right choice.
Right.
And so a lot of what we've talked about is kind of like identifying what those right choices are, so connecting the data, doing things like in small chunks, picking the right people to test with. But some of it is just saying, just having the both the leadership permission, and the personal comfortability with,
Hmm.
being wrong. That's hard for everybody. I mean, I think I remember reading some paper, it was a while ago. They charted sort of like what are the things that like professional workers are most nervous about. And like
Okay.
and like the top one was being wrong about something. And
Oh.
so it is an absurdly high number. So it's not just limited to the L&D community. It really is like nobody wants to be wrong, particularly when you're presenting your work in front of somebody else. And some of it just sort of is about kind of pushing through and being okay with that. Being okay with like, sort of setting the environment where it's like casual, setting the environment where, you're saying, hey, we're just going to try this out. This is not for, this
Yeah.
is this is just playing around.
Yeah.
And there's sort of the concept around, you talk a lot about improv in learning and development. It's a topic. I do not have a background in improv. I've used it a lot in my training programs though, but I think that there's this idea, it's not just about the yes and, it's
Yeah.
about going to the flow and really listening and accepting what somebody else is providing. And I think when you can create those environments with your test users, or your communities that you're giving support to, or that you're providing, content to, that's really where you get the best feedback. And
Yeah.
then you can
And I
joke about it at the end. You could be like, "Hey, I mean, for instance, there was a training program that I developed. It was actually for Deloitte. We had structured it was this large, milestone program. It was like hundreds of people on the stage, or hundreds of people in this ballroom. Very very high production values, and we had created this workflow, this like bit where it was like these people were going to come on the stage and they were going to do this thing, and then there was going to be this training. It was a lot of steps. It that failed massively. We had done the research. We had done all the work. It was a
uh
disaster. And I'm sitting in the back with my, like furiously typing on my computer, trying to save this thing in front of these like 300 or 400 people. It was a mess. And so, what ended up happening after that call wasn't, or after that event was not like, oh, this was such a disaster. We have to like make all of these changes. It was well, we tried that and it didn't work, did it? And you could kind of find a way to laugh about that. I think that's a thing that I think leaders, like L&D leaders and deans and business owners, that's a place where I think they can really drive on, is giving their teams that permission and focus and the ability to
yeah,
fail.
and that's what I was going to touch on is I think a lot of it is how you model, I think, behavior to your team. I was
Mm,
very fortunate. I've been uh, so when I got hired on, the gentleman that hired me is now our CEO. So I learned a lot from him, for better or worse. But one of the things I didn't understand at the time was I thought every person who had 2 years of experience would yell at the CEO if they thought they were wrong. He wasn't the CEO at the
mm,
time, but we would get in
yeah.
shit. We had somebody join that wasn't from our company, and he goes, "Is that how all your meetings are? Like,
Mm,
is this person just like saying you're wrong to your face?" And he's like, "Well, why wouldn't he? Like, don't we just want what's best?" And so I've grown up in this org, which is very much like you have a spirited debate of what you think is right and what you think
mhm.
is wrong, and whoever has the best idea wins, right? At the end of the day, and I think that creates a lot of safety. But then knowing, I mean, you have to obviously know when that is applicable, when that isn't.
Uh-huh.
But I think you can showcase a lot of that. And I've seen other leaders in our organization who have come in that didn't share that. They kind of struggled a little bit trying to be more of a, you know, traditional top down kind of lead,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
push information down. And it's fascinating to see the differences of the ideas that come out.
Yeah, I mean it is a, I feel really strongly that it's important for teams across disciplines. So, I mean, whether it's learning development or any other kind of function, to make sure that you are active at setting those norms and sort of like practices that you're going to follow as the team. One of the things that we do at Deloitte is we have a focus on empowered well-being, but that is part of that conversation is a conversation around how do we want to work together. Deloitte, like many other consulting and professional services firms, we're spread all around the world, and we
Yeah.
have folks of very different styles and backgrounds and requirements, things like that. Oftentimes a conscious conversation when you're starting work with those people, with new people, around what do I want my core hours to be? What's the best way to to get in touch with me?
Mm,
How do I like to be challenged?
yeah.
How do I like to make decisions? Am I more of a person that is a data person or an ideas person? Kind of having that shared understanding as a team is often the way that you create that element of safety. Um, and that's a thing that I think anyone, regardless of whether they're in L&D, I think can really adopt.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears to something a little bit and get back to this idea of failing fast and
Mm,
the need of it today. I was just talking to somebody about skills and we were talking about, this big shift to a skills-based organization where skills are really at the center. And you
mhm,
touched on it as well, Patrick, recently. And I was telling them, we didn't used to have the ability
mm.
to get a consensus on skills quickly in the
Yeah,
past. Like AI has really helped us kind of fill in the gaps. And, to your point, I tell people, hey, it's not perfect. But honestly, if you were to try to go back to the other way of like working with every department, having them tell you what skills are important for a marketer or a salesperson
yeah,
or whatever, that would take, gosh, how long would that take? At least 6 months of a
at
project,
least.
right? To like
Hmm.
get an
Yeah.
agreement and then do something about that agreement. And then you go to
Hmm.
somebody else and you pretty much started back over, right? Because it was all job and it was the job analysis
Hmm. Hmm.
or role specifics versus skill. So like, how do you feel? I feel like the idea to like move quickly is actually kind of the technology is almost setting our pace for us if we allow it to.
Yeah.
How do you think technology is really, I don't know, changing uh, not just what we can do, but maybe what is expected for us to be able to do in
Mm.
a short amount of time as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is sort of the idea of a burning platform here for L&D. I mean, to your example, I've done those projects where it's, you're doing the competency model for XYZ, job type. It does take 6 to 9 months. It takes a long time, regardless of what other technology you have.
Yep.
And ultimately, the information is one way. You are asking
Hmm.
people to
Hmm.
tell you what skills they need. They are telling you in some way, shape, or form. You, as an L&D person, are writing it down and putting it in an Excel spreadsheet or whatever platform you're
Yeah, yeah.
using. Um, in my view, that's not high value. If all you're doing is gathering information and kind of spitting it out, that's a tough business to be in, I think. I think L&D needs to reposition itself from, the order taker model into the strategic talent advisor. And what that
Mm.
means is you have a baseline understanding of what is the state of development of your workforce. You can gather that from all kinds of data. Microsoft, for example, through its Viva product, they have the ability to, kind of see how people are engaging with each other in email and Teams and its other application. And that gives you an understanding of how connected people are to each other.
That's through their
Um,
graph database, right? Isn't that what they're?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And other tools do very similar things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's important for L&D to have to have that understanding and to use that data to kind of sense where the skills are, where the state of the workforce development is. And then on the other side, to be able to take the mission of an organization and start to decompose what are the skills required to
Mm,
deliver on that mission. And when you put those two pieces of information together, you start to see the gaps. Not individual gaps, not gaps in terms of, oh, this person doesn't
yeah.
have the
Yeah.
skills necessary to deliver, but rather, here's where I need to start targeting learning so that our workforce can really meet those current and evolving needs.
And it's all connected because, you mentioned the half-life was what, 18 months? How long?
Something like that, yeah. 18
Yeah.
to
So in
22 or something.
what was it? Who usually puts this out, or not the World Health Organization? I forget what other, or some other organization usually puts out this number as well. And yeah,
Hmm.
they recently had said like it used to be like 10 years, then it was 5 years, and yeah, now it's like 2 to 3 years, and that data was 2 years ago. So absolutely tracks that now we've got 18 months to recycle these skills, which means if you were to look at that and you were to say, well, the old way is it took 6 months for me to identify it. By the time you've actually identified the skill and done something about it to possibly
Yeah,
change a skill, that skill has moved on. Like,
yeah,
no, thank you. We don't need you anymore. Obviously, we still need you, but it's in a different
yeah.
flavor.
Hmm.
And so I think it's about kind of, and you hear a lot of like in the flow of work. And I
Hmm.
think that's where it's more looking towards is um, if the employees and the learners are requiring this knowledge to stay in front of them, it's actually a good call to action to you to say, how can we, if we know this is the case, this is the new paradigm, how do we create a new game? How do we change the game?
Hmm.
How do we go from like what is an e-learning asset or whatever it is to how do we just get them the knowledge that they want? And I know Deloitte's doing a lot about this with a lot of the agents and the connected agents that you're doing, which is phenomenal work. And I think
Hmm.
that's like that's a great example
Yeah.
of taking a little bit of a risk early to say, but listen, maybe people aren't going to keep taking a 30-minute e-learning course.
Yeah.
We just launched a leadership coach through
Hmm.
AI, and it's completely powered with AI. We built in our model, and the guy who actually wrote the content, and he's
Hmm.
our IP owner. He was like, I don't really know, like, will people like something like this? And I said, listen, for me, I would prefer that. I actually would prefer if I had you mentioned you forget a lot. I'm super forgetful. I can maybe grasp the broad concept, but if I have to go into a challenging conversation with somebody and I can ask a coach right then and there, hey, I'm about to, talk about an employee's bad performance. Give me some
Hmm.
tips.
Hmm.
And I can get real world feedback. Well, gosh, maybe I don't need Nolan to go through these 2-day leadership summits anymore,
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
about not just like failing early, but like allowing yourself to fail, like taking a big swing if you have huge payoffs.
Hmm.
And that's maybe one of the last things I want to touch on, Patrick, is in these days, like we have so many things I feel like we can do.
Hmm.
We have so many options on the table. How do you choose where to make
Hmm.
the bets? Like if you were to fail
Hmm.
early, like where were you like, you know what? I think this is some really low hanging fruit. Let's go after that.
Yeah. I think it's a tough question. I mean, it's you
Mhm.
just kind of have to choose a gut. Like I choose
Yeah.
I start with something that's kind of not super consequential. Appliance training
Yeah.
is maybe a good candidate. To your point earlier, are people going to take a 30-minute e-learning? No. People hate
Yeah.
a 30-minute e-learning, regardless of how nice it is. People hate the 30-minute e-learnings that I created, I'm sure. I think the reality is learning for it to be effective needs to be human centered, person centered, which means that it
Hmm.
needs to be short and focused. So take a compliance setting, take a compliance training and ask some tough questions. Hey, what if instead of having this WBT that like we have to do every year, that's mildly changed, and spending a lot of resources on it, what if we just actually asked people to read through a policy and click whether they agreed and
Yeah.
gave them a quick test to make sure that they understood? What if we decided to create like a little game out of this? What if we tried to do this in a different way? What if we engaged the workforce and asked them, hey, what do you want for this? And kind of those are the types of things. I would start at something that's sort of, not consequential in terms of it's not going to affect the direction of your
Right.
leadership cadre over the next 10 years. But, compliance training, hey, if it doesn't work, if for whatever reason people don't like it, you can always change it back to the thing next year. And so something like that's where I would start. But I think the learning and the flow of work, we finally have the ability to deliver on that vision with technology.
Yeah.
Not just AI, but with like technology more broadly. I think it's time for instructional designers to pick that banner back up and
Yep.
really think about what does that look like on an hour to hour basis. How are we engaging with the workforce in learning so that they're learning, they're using content, they're growing, and they're engaging with these systems more effectively.
Yeah, well said and interesting. I just saw a post from a lady that I follow on LinkedIn, and she said I said something like, "Is learning dead?"
Mm,
And it was, of course it's not.
mhm.
Um, and what I wrote to her, I said, it's interesting that you would even make a post like that because I feel now is the time. Like I feel
Yeah.
people and CEOs are looking for an answer to talent because talent is the finite resource.
Yeah.
I personally feel that AI has been a great leveler,
Mhm,
for better or worse, right? It's really it's leveled a lot of the playing ground, just like tech did way back when. Like
mhm.
that allowed Microsoft to surpass its competitors that were a fraction of its size, right? Like PayPal grew to where it was, not because it was the most, or the most secure financial or the longest, it wasn't Wells Fargo, it wasn't US Bank. No, it just created something leveraging technology and it was
Yeah.
able to do so, really, really quickly. And so I think AI is going to level a lot of that competition for people that
For sure.
possibly weren't able to. I met a person at I don't know. Were you at HR Tech this year, Patrick? Do
I
you?
wasn't. No,
Okay,
no.
so I was
I've
at
been
a
in previous years, but
Deloitte event at HR Tech,
mhm,
and I was talking to a founder, and he had said, I went to this startup event in Silicon Valley, and I felt so bad because these people got up and they were like, we've been building this tool for the past 2 years and it's
mm,
so great. And he goes, he goes, I turned to the person sitting next to me and I said, we developed that in 2 months with AI.
yeah.
You
It's
know,
funny. It's funny. I'm sorry. It's funny you should mention this. I happen to have been doing something very similar to this. So, I the leadership program that I mentioned with the thing that failed,
yeah.
terribly. I still have. We don't. Deloitte does not use that program anymore. I still have all of that content, and I was, one of the things I wanted to experiment is what if I created a chatbot that ingested that material and would be able to provide advice as a instructor from that
Yeah.
course, as a facilitator from that course. So kind of mark something up really quickly. It took me about an afternoon to create a solution, um, and test it out. And as I started testing it out, I realized instantly what some of the strengths and limitations were. I think
Mm,
that mindset of getting to something quickly, just trying something out. AI is it's incredibly complicated, but it's not actually that complicated to develop things.
mm-mm.
And things are getting easier and easier with agentic AI and these sort of no code, low code platforms. These things are becoming what writing an HTML website on with like a notepad text editor to using Squarespace or another sort of equivalent platform. That's sort of where we're at. I think instructional designers need to embrace that because that's really where you're going to learn and grow. And that's really where you're going to drive the value as an organization.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's where, so, you're kind of, it's kind of heeding the own advice of, uh, if talent is going to be the leveler, you be that
Yeah,
talent that helps level your organization. They're looking to
yeah,
you. It's a great opportunity to answer that call. So, what a great way to end. Patrick, thank you so much for investing some of your time with us and sharing some of the lessons. I think this was a really great conversation from my perspective. So much we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the thing, and don't take a step back and just think of how do we feel about doing some of these things quickly? Like, what is the emotion behind it, and how do we change the way that we approach these projects that we have to do? So, thanks
certainly.
for adding that perspective.
Of course, yeah, no, happy to be here. I mean, like I said, I think learning is where culture lives, and learning is really important for everybody. And so, as instructional designers, as learning professionals, we have a powerful opportunity. And I hope for folks who are listening or watching, to partner with them on that. So
Yeah, well, everyone, Patrick Peterson is on LinkedIn. He is not the famous NFL athlete, Patrick Peterson. So don't confuse the two, the two of them. This is Patrick Peterson with Deloitte, not with the Arizona Cardinals or wherever he is by the time this comes out. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. Look forward to possibly having you on sometime in the future.
wonderful. Thanks for having me.